the solution of the problem set. So in the previous videos, I looked at question A, B, and C. I did it in multiple ways. First, I did it by just solving the monopoly problem the way we did in the pre-sessionals. Then I did it with an Excel spreadsheet. Then I changed the different numbers of the Excel spreadsheet, so you can look at that if part 1 to 3 are still going to be problematic. But what I want to try and focus on is on the remaining bits. So part D, part E, and part F. So what does part D tell us? Produce a graph with quantity on the horizontal axis and profit on the vertical axis, assuming that the firm has fixed costs of 1,500 monthly. Does your optimal price from C fit with the optimal quantity you derive from this graph? Now devise your graph, assuming the fixed cost is 2,000 monthly. How does the graph and the optimal quantity change? Okay, so let's talk about this. Let me give you a little bit more from the pre-sessional cases. From the pre-sessional, if you remember, imagine we started off by this idea of starting with a demand function. And then from this demand function, we were able to come up with, we had quantity here, price here, and we were able to write things like revenues here. Okay, remember how that revenue was? How was that revenue calculated? Well, we know it was going to be sort of like a hump shape. So we know that that revenue is going to peak here, and it's going to be symmetric, and it's going to go down here. Okay, that was the revenue that we kind of build up intuition in the pre-sessional courses to get this revenue. Now, what if you had some random cost here? If you had some random cost here, marginal cost, and what I wanted to do is I didn't want to draw revenue, but I wanted to draw operational profits. Operational profits. What are operational profit? I usually call operational profit any profits ignoring fixed costs. So assume that you didn't have any fixed costs. What would the operational profits be, right? That's how I like to think about it. Now, what's going to happen here is that, of course, now because you have marginal cost, your profits will be lower, of course, than the revenues, right? From revenues, you will have to take away costs. And what will happen is that, remember in the pre-sessional, I told you roughly, think about this as your new demand function kind of looks this way. And now you know that the optimal price will be somewhere in the middle. So it'll be somewhere here, perhaps. 3, 3, so somewhere here. It got stuck. Did it get stuck? No. No, it's working. So if this was like this, and I could just go down here, down, my profits will now peak at this point here. So it will be, smaller than my revenues, of course, will peak somewhere here, and then we'll go to 0 here. And of course, if I keep on expanding the quantity, I'll have to sell below my marginal cost, so my operational profit will be negative. What happens if I want total profits? So here, I make another graph, and I call this total, or net profit.
Sorry, I don't understand why operational profit peaks at that time. I don't get it.
So this bit here, lull, will peak at this point here, because now all of a sudden you realize that by expanding production, right? By expanding production, the price gets closer to that marginal cost, right? Your profit, basically what you're saying is that, what is your profit going to be at this point here? Profits are going to be 0. What is your profit going to be at this point here? But you're selling at your marginal cost. Your price
Maybe math.
your price is equal to marginal cost. You make pizzas, they cost you 5, you sell them for 5. How much profit are you going to make? 0. So now the point of symmetry changes. Now you're making profit of 0 here and profit of 0 here, and that's a symmetric thing.
Okay.
That's why that has to shift. Before, if you were just focusing on revenue, or if you didn't have any cost, then you'd have profit of 0 here and you'd have profit of 0 here. Right?
Okay.
If your costs were 0. But as your costs go up, right, the optimal price where you want to be changes. But that's a good question, right? Why did this peak change? Well, it changed because those costs made us change, right? Remember, I asked you a question before in first class. I said, if you're a monopolist and your costs go down, do you have to change your price? The answer is no, I don't have to change my price. But if I ask you a slightly different question, do you want to change your price? You would say, absolutely. If my costs go down, I would want to lower my price so I can expand my profits by expanding quantity. Because now it's become more profitable to expand quantity. In other words, you're saying the peak is changing. Okay? The peak of this function here is changing as your marginal cost changes. Okay? Because you can think of this movement from this graph here to this graph here as marginal cost going from 0 to something, right? So this would also be equal to the operational profits if marginal cost is equal to 0. It's the same thing. Okay? So if you have fixed costs, what will happen to this graph if you have fixed costs? It will shift downwards. Okay? It will shift downwards. So if you did have fixed costs, what you would do is so you take this right here, and then you'd slide it down by whatever the amount of fixed cost that you have. Okay? So this distance here would be the fixed cost. Does it change the peak of your function? No, it doesn't. Does it change the optimal amount that you'd like to produce? No, it doesn't. Okay. What if the fixed costs were really extreme? So what if the fixed costs were really big? So let's actually take this. Let's make the fixed cost a little bit higher. So let's do this. Make the fixed cost here. This is your new fixed cost. The new fixed cost. Let me ask you a tricky question, perhaps. Is there any level of quantity at which you can make a positive net profit? That's not the tricky question. The answer should be, no, there isn't. I'm just making negative profits. Here's the tricky question. That every quantity level that you produce, you're making negative profits. Should you produce?
No.
No. That's the tricky question, because the answer is absolutely.
Negative profits.
Yeah,
If you don't produce, you get like negative.
perfect. It would have been very obvious if I asked you, would you prefer to make minus 2 million in profit, or would you prefer to make minus 1 million? Of course, the answer would have been, I would prefer to make a loss of 1 million rather than to make a loss of 2 million. So even when your net profits are negative, it doesn't mean that you don't want to produce. That's why you sometimes will see firms with very high fixed costs that keep on producing. And they're making losses. Because the fixed costs have already been incurred. and they're better off producing than shutting off. So that's one thing that you should kind of keep in mind. So let me go back to this question. Produce a graph with quantity on horizontal axis and profit on the vertical axis. Assume that the firm has fixed cost of 1,500 monthly. Does your optimal price from C fit with the optimum quantity derived from this graph? And the answer is yes. The quantity didn't change, the price shouldn't change. Now revise your graph, assume that the fixed cost is 2,000 monthly. How do the graph and the optimal quantity change? They don't change. So what's the lesson that you learned from that part D is fixed costs have no say on the optimal price and quantity, but they do have a say on the final profit that you're going to get. Right? Whether you're going to be profitable or less profitable or unprofitable and making losses. Okay, it does say that. Okay, so that is that sort of like part D of it. So I will stop this here.